All right, let's get right into it. In science and, in life, the most honest answer to a tough question is usually, it depends. But what happens when that simple, intuitive answer becomes almost impossible to actually prove with data? Today, we are cracking the code on one of the biggest and most hidden challenges in scientific research.
I mean, think about it for a second. Does a new training program actually work? Well, it depends on the team's culture, right? Is a certain leadership style any good? It totally depends on how stressed out the employees are. Will a new teaching method boost test scores? It probably depends on the resources that school has. These are the really interesting questions, the ones with nuance, but for scientists, they've been incredibly hard to pin down.
So, let's unpack this whole "it depends" dilemma. Because in science, it's not just some casual phrase. Nope, it represents a very specific kind of scientific puzzle, and it's one that has been driving researchers crazy for decades.
Okay, so the fancy scientific term for this is a cross-level interaction. I know it sounds a little intimidating, but the idea behind it is actually super simple. Just picture an employee's personal skill level. That's one level, the individual. Now picture their team's overall vibe, whether it's supportive or not. That's a higher level, the team. A cross-level interaction happens when that employee's skill only leads to great performance if they're on a supportive team. See? The relationship at the individual level depends on what's happening at the team level.
And look, this isn't just some dusty, niche academic problem. These interactions are absolutely central to how we understand the world. They're the foundation of things called contingency theories, the big idea that there's no single best way to lead or organize. It all depends on the situation. It's also the core of what we call person-environment fit, that idea that you thrive when your personality matches your surroundings. So yeah, figuring this stuff out is a pretty big deal. For the longest time, researchers would come up with these brilliant "it depends" theories, but when they actually went to test them, the data would just fall flat. It was like there was some kind of invisible barrier that was stopping them from proving what they intuitively knew had to be true.
You can imagine how maddening this was for the scientific community. I mean, think about it. You have a solid theory, it makes perfect sense, but time and time again, the statistical tests come back saying, nope, nothing here. It led a lot of people to just abandon potentially groundbreaking ideas, thinking their theories were wrong when the real problem was with their tools. This creates what's called a file drawer problem, where all the failed studies get hidden away, and we're left with a totally skewed picture of reality.
And this quote, wow, it just captures that frustration perfectly. This is from a real published study, and you can just feel them sighing as they write it. They're basically saying, look, we think something's going on here, but our study was only designed to spot an effect if it was huge and smacked us in the face. Anything more subtle, we were guaranteed to miss it. They were pretty much flying blind, and they knew it.
The problem they're all talking about here, this invisible barrier, it has a name: statistical power. And honestly, the best way to think about it is like the magnification on a telescope. If you have a high-power telescope, you can spot even small, faint planets in the vast universe of your data. But if you have a low-power telescope, a real planet, a real effect, could be sitting right there and you'd scan right past it. You'd just conclude there's nothing there, when really your tool just wasn't strong enough.
So the big question is, just how strong was the average researcher's telescope? Well, the authors of this paper dug through decades of research to find out, and the number they landed on is pretty shocking. The average statistical power to find these effects was just 0.40. That means there was a 60% chance of completely missing a real effect that was actually there. Let that sink in. It's like your success depends on a coin flip, except you lose 60% of the time.
Faced with this massive, systemic problem, these researchers didn't just write another paper complaining about it. They decided to build a solution from the ground up. They created what is, for all intents and purposes, the ultimate research simulator to figure out once and for all what it really takes to get enough power.
They used a method called a Monte Carlo simulation. But let's just call it what it is: a flight simulator for science. Instead of building one real airplane and just hoping it flies, you can simulate thousands of different wing designs and engine configurations on a computer to see what actually works. That's what they did for research studies. They could build virtual studies and stress test them to see which ones consistently found the target and which ones crashed and burned.
And when I say they did this on a big scale, I mean it. They didn't just run a few hundred scenarios, they created and analyzed nearly 2.8 billion unique data sets. That number is just staggering. They basically simulated every research scenario you could possibly imagine to figure out exactly what separates a successful study from a failure. So,
After sifting through the results from billions of virtual experiments, what do they find? Well, it turns out all that chaos and complexity could be boiled down to 4 primary keys. 4 keys to unlocking enough statistical power to finally see what's really going on.
All right, let's run through them. First, the most obvious one, the size of the effect itself. Of course, bigger effects are easier to see. No surprise there. But then it gets really interesting. The second and third keys are the number of people you have within each group and the total number of groups you study. And finally, number 4 is a bit more technical, but it's about how much the effect naturally varies between groups. The more it bounces around, the easier it is to detect.
And this is where their findings just completely blew up one of the oldest rules in the book. For years, researchers had this simple rule of thumb called the 30-30 rule. It said, just get 30 groups with 30 people in each, and you'll be fine. Well, the simulation showed this was dead wrong. Following that rule gave you, on average, a statistical power of only 32%. That's a 68% chance of failure. This simple rule was basically sending researchers on a mission designed to fail.
But the surprises didn't stop there. The simulation spit out another huge finding. It answered a long-standing debate. What's more important, getting more groups or getting more people inside each group? And it turns out there's a clear winner. Contrary to what a lot of people thought, adding more people to your existing groups gives you a much bigger power boost than adding more groups. For finding these specific "it depends" effects, going deep is better than going wide.
And to prove this wasn't just a theoretical problem, the researchers went back and calculated the actual power of some real published studies. And wow, just look at these numbers. The Leo and Rupp study, only a 19% chance of finding their effect. And check out the Matthew study. They had a ton of groups, 221. But because each group was so tiny, their power was still only 32%. This was happening, in print, in top journals. Only one of these, the Hoffman study, managed to clear that 0.80 power level that's considered good enough.
But you know, the point of all this work wasn't just to say, hey everyone, we've been doing it wrong. The point was to fix the problem. The simulation didn't just give us insight. It gave us a blueprint for how to build a better, stronger study right from the very start.
And that's exactly what they did. The final product of all this insane number crunching was a practical tool that researchers can actually use. For the first time, scientists could reliably estimate their statistical power before they spent a dime or collected a single piece of data. They could finally check if their telescope was strong enough for the job ahead of time. And if it wasn't, the tool could tell them exactly how to fix it. No more flying blind.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, a few things. First, it means good ideas won't get thrown in the trash just because they were tested with a weak design. Second, it helps make science more efficient by making sure precious resources go to studies that actually have a shot at finding something. And finally, for all of us, it makes us smarter consumers of science. Now, when we see a study that says it found no effect, we know to ask a crucial follow-up. Okay, but was your telescope even powerful enough to see it in the first place?
And that just leaves us with this one kind of haunting question, doesn't it? For all those decades that scientists were out there doing their best work, but unknowingly using these low-power designs, how many brilliant insights into how the world works did we miss? How many discoveries are still just sitting out there, waiting for someone to finally point a powerful enough telescope in the right direction?